And right now we've got our friend and colleague, Stephen Dixon, to give his personal insight into the story. Stephen is the weekend breakfast host here on GB News. Quite sobering, Stephen, to hear what the doctor said there, that basically if you were born 100 years ago, well, that would have been that.
Yeah, that would have been that. You'd have been dead. Someone like me would, I mean, I was diagnosed at 17 and I would have been dead well before my 18th birthday. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable, isn't it? And yet here we are 100 years later, and people like me can live long, happy, active lives. I mean, pretty much the same as anybody else. I mean, the difference, as you two know, because I've worked with you both for a long time, is that I have to think about my diabetes, my type 1, almost every minute of the day. You never forget about it, but as long as you get your head around what you're doing, then you can just sort of carry on as normal. So it's incredible where we are just a century later.
Yeah, it's a real celebration of science, isn't it, of overcoming adversity. Look, I've sat beside you in a studio where we presented for many years together, where you've been checking your blood levels, your insulin levels, when we've been in ad breaks and things. I've seen you having hypos, and as you say, it's something that you're able to manage because of science.
Science is phenomenal. You know, I'm a geek anyway, but I mean, I have something on my arm called a Freestyle Libre sensor, which just plugs into my arm, and I can check my bloods, my glucose levels, just by swiping my phone, which is phenomenal. And now I'm on an insulin pump, which is as small as this. And if you're listening on the radio, it's about the size of a very fat credit card. But this has a little vial of insulin in it, very small. It's got just 3 millilitres of insulin in it. And that keeps me alive for 3 days.
Wow.
And it gives me a little squirt of insulin every 3 minutes, 24 hours a day. And it makes life much more normal, much more livable. But you can never quite forget you've got it. But I think if you sort of work with diabetes rather than try and fight it, you have a much better chance of a happier life, I think.
And how were you diagnosed, Stephen? I mean, how old were you, and what did it mean when you were much younger?
It's a bit of a shock when you're diagnosed, but it's the classic symptoms, Eamonn. I managed to avoid ending up in hospital, which is quite good and quite unusual in a way. But you become very, very thirsty, and you are going for a wee a lot. I mean, like pints and pints every hour. And with that, you lose an awful lot of weight. I lost a couple of stone within a couple of weeks. And that's because your body can't convert the glucose in your blood into usable energy. So as a result, you digest all your fat. And then the body starts to digest all the muscle in your body, and that's what can prove to be fatal. So I lost a lot of weight, was incredibly thirsty, and going for a wee all the time. And if they're the classic symptoms. I walked into the doctor's surgery with my father, and the doctor took one look at me and said, "I think you're diabetic." That's how obvious it is. And I was put on insulin. I had my first shot the same day. I'm trying to think what the date is now. It's very, very nearly the anniversary of mine. I think it was the 17th of January I had my first injection.
Wow.
Back in 30 years ago. So it turns your life around. It's a shock to the system. But, you know, it keeps you alive. What can you do?
Well, if you've type 2, you might be able to do things. A lot of people get very angry and very sensitive about people not distinguishing between what you're born with, what you had type 1, and type 2. To people who can maybe do something about their condition, what would you say to them?
Well, you've got to do what you can. I mean, I do what I can to keep healthy, and if you've got type 2, you have got to do what you can too. Now, some people cannot avoid having type 2. They used to call it late onset because it was more in older people when the pancreas just produced less insulin than it was, and you can take medication which increases the sensitivity of that insulin. But if you are carrying a lot of extra weight, if you're not doing enough exercise, and if you're eating very sort of carb heavy food, then that can put a strain on your pancreas. And so if you are tipped as being pre-diabetic, is what they call it, pre-type 2 diabetes, then you can take real action to avoid needing extra medication and ultimately needing to take insulin. And you should just do it, because it might be a pain in the neck getting your head around it, but it's just much better. It's about being healthy. It's about living longer, ultimately. So why wouldn't you? But you've got to do what you can. It's a responsibility, I think, that we all have to take, whether you're type 2 or type 1.
Well, Stephen, it's great that you use your public platform to be a Diabetes UK ambassador. Thank you for highlighting this, and we're so pleased that they came up with this invention 100 years ago so that you can be here alongside us presenting on GB News. Thanks, Stephen.